Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our Monday show. Thank you all so much for being here. We're actually streaming this one, I can see, across the known universe. So, yeah, we're going to the Twitters or the X, I should call it that, really, Getter, Rumble, and again, in a moment of madness, to YouTube and to Facebook as well, I think. So they all should be out there. I know we don't normally go to YouTube, but well, just for given the topic we're about to talk with our special guest, I can't see how YouTube can find this controversial. Well, it's only if we mention anything medical, anything medical, then we're in big trouble. So a warm welcome to Chris Davies, my friend, and of course to Citizen K, my another good friend. Thank you guys for being here. And yeah, it does look like Carrie Lake's been robbed. But listen, there's so much to get through. We're good. I mean, I'll tell you what. These shows, I'm really looking forward to tonight, and also Wednesday night as well. Jennifer Curie is joining me on Wednesday night, and these are feel-good shows because if we can't enjoy the moment that we're in, and I'm talking about we collectively, meaning America, and some of us this side of the pond who are basically, it's in our DNA, the old American freedom and liberty and all of that. We're just enjoying it. So I'm really looking forward to that. So without any further ado, it's my absolute pleasure to introduce you guys to someone who you may or may not know, but after tonight you'll definitely know him. And let's bring him into the studio. And his name is Brandon Weichhert. Brandon, did I get it right?
Yeah, basically. Yeah, it's the German pronunciation you did, which is great.
Yeah.
We don't do that in America.
Well, hey, listen, it's really good to spend this time with you because
likewise.
What we're going to do is we will get to Ukraine, and we're going to talk about all the stuff that where we go with Ukraine and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And I think that'll be very enjoyable. But first of all, I just want to make people, perhaps you could just give people a little bio about yourself so they know who you are. Yeah.
Sure. Well, Brandon Weichhert, I was a congressional staffer for several years, worked for a guy, Ted Yoho. He's no longer in office, out of Florida's 3rd District. I am from Florida, and we were on the House Foreign Affairs Committee and the Ag Committee, so that was a lot of fun to do some of that work when I was on the Hill. I actually left the Hill to spend some time at Oxford. I was at New College, did some studying there, so GDBM. For all my Oxford friends out there. And I then came back to the States, and I was in Oxford around the time that Trump came down the escalator in 2016. And I was emailing, I was seeing Brexit, up close and personal in England. And then I was emailing my friends back in the States because I knew it was going back, and I was looking to get back into politics, going back to DC. And I was like, listen, guys, you're all wrong. This nationalist movement, it's transatlantic, and if Trump can get through the primary, he will be the guy, and he will defeat Hillary. And everybody was telling me, don't write that in public. Don't do, because you're going to lose. You're not going to get any jobs. Yeah. Sure enough, my career was destroyed because I immediately went to Julie Ponzi and Ben Boychuk over at American Greatness, which was a very up-and-coming publication at the time. And I was like, I've got articles I want you to publish under my name. And they were like, you're crazy, but we'll do it. And signed the letter for Scholars and Writers for Trump under F.H. Buckley, created it, was a very early adopter of the MAGA movement. And then basically I've sort of become a consultant. They call me a geotechnology analyst because basically what I look at is the confluence of emerging technology and how it impacts national security. And so I'm a consultant for the Defense Department, the U.S. Defense Department. I've spoken with the guys in Britain occasionally when Boris Johnson was the PM there. I've done some consulting work with the Polish government, the previous government. So I'm a geopolitical analyst. I have a master's from the Institute of World Politics in Washington, D.C., in statecraft and national security affairs. And that's sort of been my bailiwick for over a decade now. So.
That's pretty impressive that there. I mean, it's interesting you reference Brexit because 2016 was a big year, Brandon, wasn't it? Because
it was momentous.
We voted for freedom from the tyranny of the European Union. and America voted for Donald Trump
Right.
against all the odds. I mean,
Yep.
I remember back, I think it was November of 2015, being brought into. They brought me back then. They allowed me in the mainstream TV media. It's before I was permanently cancelled from that. And I remember saying I thought Donald Trump would win. So like you,
Yeah.
I was an early adopter of MAGA, but I think we're all ultra MAGA now, aren't we? Because
Yeah.
hey, listen, the past week has been just brilliant. I mean, how do you feel about what happened? And were you expecting it? Were you expecting the scale of victory? What's your feelings, Brandon?
Well, the intellectual side of me said that I didn't think Trump was going to win because I thought they had it stacked against him. I thought that they were going to pull all kinds of
Mm,
chicanery. I thought the Republicans were going to throw him under the bus. I just the intellectual side of me said if he wins, it's going to be by a narrow margin because it's
yeah.
so corrupt. And boy, I was watching. I for fun decided to watch MSNBC the night of election, and
Okay.
oh man, I was just rolling over. I was live tweeting with people, and
Yeah.
his margin of victory was so great.
I
I
know.
I didn't I didn't think it would be this big, but it just shows you, when he says he has a double mandate, he's right. He did, because in 2016, I knew a lot of the establishment Republican people. In 2016, they were going to fight him because their argument was he really didn't have a mandate. Well, you can't
Yeah.
make that argument now. He won not only the electoral vote bigly, but he won the popular vote, and he did it by margins that I don't think we've seen at least in 20 years, maybe not since Reagan, the last truly great Republican president.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
and I think that we are in store, at least here in the United States. Now, you guys overseas have a
Oh,
lot of problems.
we got a lot of problems.
Even
Yeah.
our friends to the North, Canada, has a lot of problems. I have
Yeah.
many Canadian friends in Alberta saying, "Can
Yeah.
you please just take us in?"
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
I think life here in the United States in the next 12 months, the country's going to be unlike anything probably since the 80s. That
Yeah.
I really think we're in store for rejuvenation. That's if something bad doesn't happen to Trump, which is why I would beg Trump, stay at Mar-a-Lago until
Mm,
inauguration day. Don't get
mm,
on your plane.
mm,
Don't leave. Stay at Mar-a-Lago. Just
mm.
wait 69 days, and then you are home free, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I've got to say, Brandon, I mean, I would favor a US invasion of the UK, because we need to reverse what happened back then. We need rescued because we're in the grip, as you know, of an authoritarian socialist regime, which is really bad news.
It's
But
what we avoided here. I mean, we were on the brink
yeah,
with
oh yeah,
Kamala, la 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 la.
yeah,
We were on the brink. And honestly, I'll just throw out one other little pet theory of mine.
yeah,
I actually think the reason they were so haughty and arrogant right up until the end, and the reason that everybody is so stunned by the implosion of Kamala,
mhm,
la la,
mhm,
is because they were not planning for Trump to still be alive by election day. And so I don't know how deep you want to go down that rabbit hole, but I really think that they
mhm.
were really hoping that something was going to happen to him, either health wise or, the assassination attempt,
Yeah,
because they were so sure about victory. And I just think they did not plan for him to survive 2 assassination attempts. And then he also, by the way, your audience may not know this, he made a lot of deals behind the scenes with people like Susie Wiles, his chief of staff now,
yeah,
who was more
yep,
of a conventional Republican from the Jeb Bush wing many
mm,
years ago. But he made deals with her, and Chris LaCivita, who's the other co-chair for the campaign, basically said, look, get me some of those establishment types on my side for a change. And they did it. He went to
mm,
the Silicon Valley Republicans. There's very few of them. The Peter Thiel wing. He said, look, get on my side and I will make it worth your while. And so
mm,
there's a guy from Silicon Valley whose name escapes me. He was a leading bundler for Biden in 2020. But because Peter Thiel came on with Elon Musk, this guy flipped sides. And he basically came on in the last 6 months of the Trump campaign. As long as Trump doesn't go too hard after the H-1B visa, which is the visa that allows high-tech workers to come in from
yeah,
overseas, These guys are on board. So Trump was making Jamie Dimon. He got a lot of finance people who otherwise would have hated him. He made a lot of backroom deals, and maybe that means, and Bannon said this recently, MAGA is going to be disappointed at times, but you know what? We got in. That's the key.
And I think you're right. I mean, although I am ultra MAGA, I want it to be so hard, so tough.
Yeah.
But in the realistic world, we know it doesn't quite work like that, But having said that, I mean, if we can start the choice, the guy that he's appointed to be in charge of the border and the deportation.
Homan, yeah. Tom Homan,
what a guy, Brandon. Oh, I'm loving him.
Yeah, he's phenomenal. I've met him a handful of times at Heritage Foundation. Kevin Roberts is somebody, the president of Heritage, who I just adore. And anybody that Kevin gives the blessing to, I think, well, they must really have it going on, because Kevin is a very, very tough person to impress. And so Kevin gave this morning on Twitter, he gave his blessing to Homan. There's a lot of people involved right now. There's a guy on the cyber team for the NSC, Josh Steinman, young guy like me. Josh is brilliant, and he is just a cut up. He is somebody that is so MAGA, and he's going to make sure the right people get involved. This is what we need. This is what America needs. And by the way, it's what Britain needs too. The Anglo world needs this.
Yeah, it's almost the entire world needs this. Certainly the free world needs it, Brandon.
That's right. That's right.
And certainly I look upon this as a new day for America. But I think the geopolitical consequences will be way beyond your shores, because I think Donald Trump, for example, I think he's quite fond of the UK. Broadly speaking, that doesn't mean he's going to be necessarily fond of the British government.
But Keir Starmer's a real problem, and there's got to be, he's going to have to really be tough. I think he's probably going to have to be tougher with Keir than he is with Putin, and that's sad. And that's sad.
We'll talk about that. We're definitely going to talk about that in a minute. Yeah. I mean, I think the genius of Trump might be that if he tries to split Britain, the UK, from the EU by offering us some sort of trade tariff discount or whatever, I mean, that'll be genius, because then Starmer has to choose between the huge American market or his beloved EU. Right. I'd love that, Brandon.
Well, this was the deal. This was similar to a deal that Bannon was trying to push when he was in the White House in the first term, and I think it was it wasn't David Cameron. It was the woman after Cameron. And
Theresa May.
It was Theresa May poo-pooed the whole thing. And Bannon and everybody was like, what are you doing? This is a great deal. The idea was to basically link more directly the US, Canadian, and British markets together after Brexit. And May was like, oh no, we're not doing that. At the same time, though, I will say, as somebody who's an immigration hawk, I'm very concerned about British policies on immigration. And that is what really worries me when it comes to a more increased alliance with Britain on things like trade, because I don't want them to try to backdoor us into accepting these, Islamist refugees. We've already got enough problems here. Canada's already trying to shove them on us through the northern border. The last thing I want is now to have more of them coming in, from an increased relationship with Britain. So there's going to have to be some tough love from Trump towards Starmer.
Oh, I'm hoping so. And of course, I've made a point of, and I see lots of others have done this, they've captured the old tweets of essentially everybody in this Labour government, from the Prime Minister, the Foreign Secretary, low IQ David Lammy, all of them. they've said, Brandon, the most horrible things about Donald Trump. And I don't know how Trump feels about these things. I mean, does he just shrug it off, or does he hold it? But boy, oh boy, there's some. I mean, the Foreign Secretary is called Trump fascist, Nazi. I mean, you name it. And he's the guy. He's a Foreign Secretary. How is that going to work? Do you think, Brandon? Do you think?
Well, it gets worse. There was the report that Starmer had sent activists to help the Democratic Party. So I can just tell you right now, I don't know for sure, but I personally, and I say this as somebody whose grandmother is British, I say this as somebody whose great grandfather was in MI6. So I have a love for Britain. I'm an Anglophile, but I really hope Trump sticks it to Britain for doing that, because that was disgusting.
Yep.
That was election interference. That was foreign. And by the way, it's not the first time that Britain's interfered in our election. The whole
Nice.
Russia collusion thing
Yep.
was a Five Eyes scandal run wild, and Britain was at the
I
heart
know.
of that.
I got to say, as a Brit, I'm ashamed of the way in which successive British governments, Brandon, have interfered on the wrong side of American. Yep. But they've all been caught out. I mean, you mentioned the fact that Labour sent 100 of their their minions to campaign for Kamal in the Rust Belts, and of course it blew up. They all thought she was going to win. They all believe their own publicity, don't they? These, I mean, well, look, we've got J-Lo, and she said to vote for, and we've got, and we've got Robert De Niro. So surely we've won.
Right.
I mean, how out of touch with ordinary grassroots Americans?
They love to talk about how we're siloed on the right, and to some degree we are, because they've made us siloed. I think there are many right wingers who would love to have a bastion in the New York Times to get the word out to that audience. In the same, but we're not allowed to. And like CNN has like one token pro-Trump guy every cycle. The first time it was Kayleigh McEnany and Jeff Lord. I know Jeff El Jefe. I know Jeff a little bit. Then they got rid of them because it was just too much. And now they have this other guy who I always forget his name. He's the Southern guy. I think he was a George W. Bush guy originally. But he's a solid MAGA voice, but he's the only guy on CNN who's anywhere near MAGA, and that's it. MSNBC certainly doesn't have it. There's a lot of problems where they have siloed themselves off on the left in the corporate press, and they've convinced themselves that they are so, infallible. I mean, watching MSNBC on election night, really, not only was I laughing, I was kind of worried. I was talking to Gordon Chang the other day about this. Gordon's a friend of mine too. And I said to Gordon, were you watching? He goes, I can't watch MSNBC. I said, well, I was. It was scary because it's like they're living in another universe. They genuinely could not conceive how anybody could vote for Donald Trump. And it's like, I don't know how you couldn't have voted for Donald Trump. The price of eggs, I have 3 children under the age of 10. The price of eggs in America has gone up 300% since 2021. That means every year there's a 100% increase on the price of a carton of eggs. That will kill a family financially. And who's going to vote for that? Who's going to allow that to go on? No sane person would.
But but I mean, you watched MSNBC. I watched the BBC for laughs, but for the same purpose, because they just couldn't bring themselves to admit what we all saw was coming. And on the way the time difference thing works, I knew Trump had it won, obviously, a couple of hours before sort of the BBC early morning news came.
Right.
And the BBC came on, Brandon, and it was basically black armbands and solemn music on the hour, every hour, because I mean, they desperately didn't want Orange Man bad back.
Right.
But it was just funny. I mean, as you said, they do silo themselves off, I think, from reality. They are siloed off from reality. They live in a bubble. They tend to reject people like us. They don't really want to hear our views. And so they convince
we're fascists to them.
Nazis.
I mean, if you think somebody is a Nazi, you're going to want to not only reject them, you're going to probably want to hurt them. And, that's at stake here too.
Well, yeah, and actually, I just want to. We're going to get on to Ukraine in a sec. But just but it's good chat we're having. You mentioned that the first assassination attempt on Donald Trump on the 13th of July. I vividly remember that I was kind of watching it on my phone, and that was almost like a moment, a transformational moment, I think, for a lot of people. Elon Musk, for example, came on board the Trump train pretty much after that, because it was that almost unbelievable fight that, I watch it, and I got to say, I turned to my wife and I said, you see that? He's just won the election.
Yeah.
Now,
yeah.
There may have been other things.
And then they tried to suppress the images. Remember that? They had like maybe 4 days, 3 or 4 days where they let the images out, and the media was even reporting it. But after day 3, it was like, you didn't find it in Google. You didn't find it in the mainstream press. Everything was suppressed because they knew that was going to win the election. And, I was one of the only people who said, when I watched the Republican National Committee, or convention rather, his speech was phenomenal. I was saying that, and my friends, the few I have who are still kind of moderate or leftist, they're like, what are you talking about? That was so weird. I said, that is a man who has been transformed by a near-death experience.
Yeah.
It was a beautiful speech.
It was absolutely.
Yes, it was.
Yeah. It
was.
was a different Trump speech. But then I think the final couple of things to say is, I think the way he trolled Kamala with, the McDonald's.
It was great. It was great. Oh, there was a couple times. There was another thing he did at the end of the campaign, and I'm not.
The garbage.
Yeah. So, I had heard from people, because I was trying to figure out who was the genius that came up with that idea.
Yeah.
And I was told it was nobody on the campaign. It was all Donald Trump. And that makes sense, because the one thing that everybody knows about Mr. Trump is that he is an advertising genius. There's a reason that he's had multiple New York Times bestsellers. There's a reason his shows have done so well. There's a reason everybody wanted to do business with him up until 5 minutes ago. It's because the guy knows how to sell things. The one thing he can do is sell whatever he wants. And he's the king of it. He's the king of it.
And I think after 8 years of this, he I wouldn't say maybe he's mellowed, or maybe he's slightly, we all change, everyone, all that we have to change, but those the McDonald's thing, superb.
The garbage truck,
garbage thing was superb. And I just thought to myself, from a campaign point of view, I think it was a perfect campaign.
Well, think about this. We talk about, I have my background. I studied political science in college. So, we talk a lot in the classes. We used to talk about dynamic politicians. FDR, he captured radio first. JFK understood television before anybody else did, and understood pop culture before anybody else did, which is why even today people talk about his fashion sense, which is coming back, by the way. To me, Trump, both successful presidential cycles, the 2020 he lost, or he was stolen, whatever, but 2016 he mastered the art of Twitter and social media before anybody else could. In 2024 he mastered the art of alternative media, and he paired that with social media. That is one of the key reasons. There is a straight line between him winning on election night with the audience that he did, mostly young men, who are otherwise disengaged in politics. There's a direct line between him showing up on Joe Rogan, on people like my friend Sean Ryan's podcast, on people like Theo Vaughn's podcast. These are podcasts that Kamala wouldn't have been caught dead on. She would never have. I mean, in fact, Joe Rogan apparently offered 3 times to have her come on, and she refused. I know Sean Ryan offered, said, hey, why don't you come on and be a counterpoint? You can talk for 3 hours, however long you want. No, thanks, she said. I'm going to go to my carefully curated interviews for 5 minutes with MSNBC reporters. And that, that doesn't work anymore. That is the old way of doing things. Corporate media is dead. So you and I got out of it. The BBC had me on one time, and Dan Damon banned me after that because I ran circles around him and his guest over the Canadian border issue, which we have a border issue with Canada that nobody wants to talk about. And I proved it. But the corporate media is dead. Nobody cares. Trump won because of the alternative media space. That's the future.
You're absolutely right. And I mean, the thing is, I look back at some of the mean tweets from 2012 to 26. It was brilliant. Those are classic. Mean tweets. They're brilliant. And the thing is, you're dead right as well. I mean, Trump, like JFK, and like in previous times, he jumped on the fact that this new media that we're in, and that, for example, under the likes of Elon Musk, has suddenly allowed us a lot more. I mean, I was taken off Twitter.
Me too, in 2020.
2020, out the purge, and then brought back in 2022. And I think it's changed forever now. I don't see, if Trump hadn't have won, I think Elon was in big trouble, Brandon.
I wrote an article because my first book, I can't see it, it's back there. It's Winning Space: How America Remains a Superpower. So I was on sort of the periphery in 2018 and 19 on the Space Force rollout. That's sort of my first love. When I worked on the Hill, they used to make fun of me. They called me the Space Cadet because I was such a pro space guy. And so Elon Musk, I was asked by a friend at the Pentagon during the transition from Trump to Obama, will you sit down with Kamala's chief science advisor? And because they were hitting up multiple experts on space for inputs on who owns space. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do it. I'll talk to her for a couple hours because it's the patriotic thing to do. And that's just, I wanted to be patriotic. So I talked to this chick for 2 hours. And I learned very quickly that really what they were trying to do was find out how they can go after, using the regulatory state,
Mm,
Elon Musk.
mm,
And so
mm,
I was not supposed to do this. It was off the record meeting. I, the next day, wrote an op-ed. I tried to get it out wherever I could. The only one who would take it was Kelly over at the Washington Times. And it was an essay called Biden Cancels Elon Musk's Space Adventure. And
yeah,
I outlined in 2021, and oddly enough, nobody called me. I outlined, though, how the Biden administration was going to use the FAA to
yeah,
go after SpaceX launches in a way that never had gone after before. I outlined how the National Highway Transportation Safety Agency was going to go after Tesla recalling vehicles for things like the backup cameras weren't working. That's what they started doing almost immediately after my
mm,
call with them.
mm,
Basically, I outlined the strategy they were going to use to make Elon Musk basically conform to the agenda of the left. And what did
yeah.
he do? A couple years later, he bought Twitter. And so he blew up what they
Yeah,
were trying to do to him.
yeah,
And you're
yeah,
right. If they had been able to take out Trump, one thing, Bannon was right. Bannon said last week, if Trump lost, he would have spent the next 20 years in prison. But after that, after they got Trump in prison, they would have dismantled Elon Musk's
yeah.
empire. They
I
would have
fear so.
nationalized SpaceX, and we would have yet another DEI outlet because
Yeah,
SpaceX would have become a transgendered unit before it ever became a space flight detail.
yeah.
And that is exactly true. Elon Musk, by the way, and I say this in my first book, Elon Musk is the only reason why the Americans are in a favorable position right now in the lead in the new space race between America, China, and Russia. That is the only reason. If you remove SpaceX, the Chinese are going to defeat us.
I think just finally in this, that moment when Musk brought the rocket back down and it was caught. I mean, I've heard Trump talk about that, and I think a lot of us just going, that's just, we've never seen anything like that. This
That was
is,
old America on display. That was
ah,
old America on display.
gotcha.
And
Yeah,
we are going to make space great again. That is what we're going to do. We're going to take the moon. It will be American. We're going to take Mars. It will be American. We will then go from there. I'm telling you, this is what's going to happen. We're going to
yeah.
set the table for space mining, which is at minimum $1 trillion industry waiting to be had. This is where it's all leading. The Chinese know it. This is why the Chinese talk about they're going to do to the moon what they did to the South China Sea. And we're going to stop them now. This is not going to be allowed to happen anymore. The moon will be ours. And then Mars will be ours as well. We're going to beat the Chinese there, and it's going to be the greatest regeneration of America that we've ever seen.
Well, I'm all for a regeneration of America because there's so much to love about America. But we're now going to move to the topic that's been actually much concerning over this side of the pond as well.
As well, it should be.
Ukraine. And
Yes.
obviously, I know, Brandon, you've got a new book, a great new book out. We're going to bring it up on screen. Here we go. A
Yep, there we
disaster of
go.
a great title. A
Thank you.
disaster of our own making, isn't it just? And basically, I mean, this is how the West lost Ukraine. I mean, it's really, and I have kind of read the essence of it, and I completely agree with you, by the way. But it goes against the narrative what you're saying, because, for example,
That is what I do.
yeah, no, good man. That's what we all should do. Go against the narrative. Only dead fish go with the current. Isn't that right? Swim against the current. But here's the thing. Here's the thing. So the UK media is now, and I don't know what it's like in the States. They're sort of saying, well, now that President-elect Trump, they hate to call him President Trump, President-elect, but in my mind, he always was President Trump. YouTube. And so they're saying, well, look, it's not so bad. It looks like he might be positive towards Ukraine, and he might see. I mean, apparently he's phoned Putin and had stern words with him and all this. And they're pretending, Brandon, that somehow, some strange way, we're going to keep supporting Ukraine, endlessly pouring the money in, pouring the weaponry in, and Putin's going to eventually Moscow. Right? Talk us through. Give us a little summary, if you can, to start with, about why we've gotten to where we are, and then let's chat about where we go. So,
well, I
first,
just want to, I just want to preface by saying, had Mike Pompeo become Secretary of State and or Nikki Haley been brought into the administration, we absolutely would have kept pouring money. We absolutely would have brought in a lot of people from things like Hudson Institute that we shouldn't be bringing in. I can guarantee you they are not coming into the administration now. I can promise you that. They are neocons, and we will not allow neocons in this administration. And so it's not happening. So Ukraine better, because my understanding is there was a phone call between Trump and Zelensky in the last week at Mar-a-Lago, and Zelensky was hemming and hawing against what Trump was trying to get him to do. So Trump said, "Why don't you talk to my friend Elon Musk? He's in the room with me." And then Zelensky basically hung up. If Zelensky's going to play that game, he's going to wake up and find he doesn't have a country anymore. I mean, he basically already doesn't have a country because of his bad policies. But he's going to wake up and find, because you think the Europeans are going to have his back if America's not pouring money and resources into Ukraine? Absolutely not. We're going to make a deal with or without Kyiv. We will make a deal with Moscow. We will. And by the way, once the war in Ukraine is resolved, all the other conflicts, it's like a knock-on effect. All the other conflicts plaguing the world right now will then suddenly be tamped down. What do I mean by that? Russia is supporting Iran in the greater Middle East, which therefore means the conflict right now there is in some part being supported by the Russian military and their intelligence services. Iran is being empowered by them. The great achievement of Trump's first term in diplomacy was the North Korean freeze, stopping the push to war. The next move is to get an actual deal with North Korea. That is on ice right now, because right now the war in Ukraine, Russia is paying Kim Jong-il a boatload of money to send troops and equipment to fight the war. But if that war is no longer being fought, then suddenly Kim is looking for new friends, because one thing Kim does not want is to be a slave to either Beijing or Moscow, which right now he is. He wants to use us as a lever against them so that he can be sort of the big middleman. And then the final aspect is the great rivalry with China. Right now, Russia has become the junior partner to China in their new world empire. Well, Russia doesn't want that. They're playing along because they feel like the West is closed off to them. But guess what? If the Ukraine war ends, and it ends with us saying, keep the parts you have of Ukraine, Russia, we'll make Ukraine a neutral, Western, independent country that will never be allowed to be joining NATO, and we'll recognize Russian control over Crimea as long as the conflict ends here and now. Suddenly, Russia will then realize we're no longer a threat. They will start to roll back, and then suddenly they will say, we're not going to be so tight with China, because China is doing things to our far eastern territories that we don't like. Russia has one of the largest illegal immigration problems that's not reported on in the West, in the world. It's the illegal immigration is coming from northern China. Northern Chinese people are moving illegally into the sparsely populated, resource-rich Russian Far East, and it's part of an informal strategy to reclaim the territories that the Russians captured from the Chinese Empire in 1649. The Russians know it. They don't like it. They're accepting it for now because they don't have a choice, but they might not if suddenly the West and Russia are on good footing again.
Do you think that the war that we see, Trump will end it quickly? Do you think it will end, within a matter of months, weeks, whatever?
My belief is within the first 100 days of the Trump administration, the war will be over one way or the other. There will not be a war anymore that the U.S. is supporting, which is really all I care about at this point. Ukraine can either get on board or they can get left behind. I hope for the Ukrainians' sake they get on board, because we will preserve the western portion of the country, which is the part we care about. Ultimately, it's the part that's most like us. They share quote unquote values with us. So we'll preserve that part as an independent but neutral country, which is what it should have been from the beginning. And in fact, at the end of the Cold War, that's what we told the post-Soviet government. That's what we told them Ukraine would. And we were the ones who backtracked on that. We're the ones who broke the agreement. And we're the ones who they basically are paying the price now because of that.
Well, that's right, because for example, the 2014 color revolution, I mean, that was the U.S. is to blame for.
That was Victoria Nuland.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
awful Victoria Newland. Yeah, yeah. But
We'll go back further to 2004, the Orange Revolution, right? That
yeah,
was the revolution where basically the CIA tried to oust the somewhat pro Moscow element,
yeah,
and the Russians thought, wait a second, you're breaking the agreement that was made in '94 between us, or
yes,
'91 rather, between
yeah,
us, and how dare you? And George W. Bush was on his high of the Iraq War. You're either with us or you're against us.
sure.
Yeah, and the neocons ran rampant, not just in the Middle East, but everywhere else, and we're
Mm,
still paying for that
I
as
agree.
well. And
Yeah,
I in the book I quote, Putin was apparently sitting in his dacha, the same dacha a few years later where he humiliated President Obama. He was sitting in his dacha watching the Orange Revolution. This is during the time when Bush looked into his soul and saw a kindred spirit. Well, he was watching the revolution and he said,
yeah.
Bush lied to me. Cheney betrayed me. I will never trust the Americans again. And
Mm,
so that is the trigger point for Putin, at least.
mm,
From that moment on, he was
mm.
never going to accept whatever the Americans were trying to do in Ukraine. And I can tell you right now what the Americans were trying to do because I found the evidence. I have it cited in my book. There was a movement in the 90s and early 2000s in the think tank community, which of course is funded by all the big business multinational interests,
Yeah,
to basically use our leverage. We were the hegemon, so the Russians had no real agency. They were broken at the end of the Cold War. To
yeah,
use our leverage to push Russian power to its medieval era borders, which means push them out of the Russian naval base in Syria, which is why we got involved supporting head chopping
yeah. I remember
jihadists
that.
in the
Yeah,
Syrian civil war, to get
yeah,
them out of Tartus, which is in the eastern Med in Syria, which kick them out of there, get them out of their Black Sea port in Sevastopol in Crimea, and to get them out of the Baltic Sea by pushing them out of the Russian-controlled enclave of Kaliningrad between Poland and Germany that they've held since 1945. The
yeah,
idea was to push them back by enhancing the size of NATO, absorbing all these areas, push them back, and then watch them collapse because a Russian medieval border is not a country. It can't survive. It would collapse into 3 or 4 smaller chaotic countries that
yeah,
then Western multinational firms could then come in and exploit the trillions of dollars of rare earth minerals and natural resources in Russia. And,
yeah,
and that was the
yeah,
plan. And I know people who were at, for instance, the National Ground Intelligence Center, NGIC, who received in 2005, 6, and 7 briefings from elements at the Hudson Institute outlining this explicit plan. And while it may never have been formally adopted by NATO or the United States, I can assure you that was always the plan. And
yeah.
Putin knows this. That's why Putin says the Ukraine war is an existential war, because for him and Russia it is. They
It
know
is.
what the West is planning, or I should say what the globalists in the West are planning.
Mm,
And it's
mm.
mania. It's madness.
Yeah, I completely agree. I mean, essentially, I felt certainly over the last couple of years with some of the utterances, Brandon, coming from NATO, from Washington, it's almost like they wanted a World War III, certainly a European war at any rate, which could, of course, easily then, become a
Absolutely. Well, it
global.
already has become a world war. I mean, look, like I said, look at how all these are connected. You've got the issue in the Middle East now
Well,
being
that's true.
exacerbated.
Yeah.
They're already, the knock-on effects are already here. And so you're right. You're right. Absolutely.
Yeah, So do you believe then, Brandon, that the solution to this is actually going to be the obvious, namely Russia keeps the territory it holds at the moment broadly, and that would include Crimea and all of that, and the Donbass. I assume that
Yeah, they're getting
and
the Donbass. Yep.
they're getting the Donbass, aren't they? Which is Russian speaking anyway.
It's
Why
Russian.
shouldn't
It's
we?
been since Catherine the Great. Since
Yeah,
Catherine the Great, it's
fine.
been Russian. And so this whole getting in the middle of a Slavic blood feud is the stupidest thing we could have done. I mean,
Yep.
talk to any beat cop. Any beat cop will tell you the worst calls they get are domestic disturbance calls. And that's basically what this is. This is a family feud. We should not have any role in it.
Do you think Zelensky can survive a peace plan?
I think Zelensky's going to move down here. I live in Florida. I think Zelensky's got property here. I'm not kidding. He's got a huge tract of land he just bought recently here in Florida. I think in about a year, you're going to see him living there, or he's going to get a bullet in the back of his head.
Yeah. Yeah, well, that's what I mean. Because the thing is, the carnage, Brandon, the carnage that we've all witnessed, even if the mainstream media doesn't want to talk about it, the up to what half a million dead Ukrainians, maybe the same Russians. I mean, the soil of eastern Ukraine is steeped in blood, and yet the
Well,
lunatics.
historically, it always is.
Well, true, but I mean, yeah, but that's not really good, and
No.
and yet, and yet we have got the like NATO still going through the motions of,
Yep.
well, we're going to stand with our friends, we all stand with Ukraine. It's rubbish that NATO will
They don't
have
care
to
about
do it.
Ukraine. They don't
No,
care about Ukraine. Nobody
no,
cares about Ukraine. The Ukrainian government doesn't care about Ukraine. The Ukrainian government is in place as a giant grift machine to
yeah,
wash billions of U.S. tax dollars out of the
mm,
country. They take a cut and then they buy yachts here in Miami. They buy land in Ocala, Florida. They
yeah,
buy waterfront property in Naples, Florida, and they have a escape hatch. And then they send the rest of Victoria Nuland in her retirement speech a few
yeah,
months ago, she let the cat out of the bag inadvertently. Victoria Nuland said all the Americans who are opposing financial aid to Ukraine don't understand. Almost 90% or more of that money is coming back here. Well, it's not coming back here to we the people. It's
no,
not coming back here to our local communities. It's going back to where I used to live in Northern Virginia and Southern Maryland and Washington,
yeah,
D.C.
yeah,
The 7 wealthiest counties in America ring Washington, D.C. That money is going back into the pockets of defense contractors, their lobbyists, and the politicians in both parties that they bought and paid for. That it's one giant money machine. It's a self-licking ice cream cone, and we all know Joe Biden's love of ice cream. So there you go.
Yeah, chalky chip flavor, I think, is his preference, isn't it? But I mean, you mentioned Biden and
Corruption
Hunter,
flavor.
and I mean the unbelievable corruption that the Biden criminal cartel have been up to, and Ukraine has been a central plank within that, hasn't it, Brandon?
Ukraine is the linchpin of
Mm,
the Democratic Party, and I tracked this in my book. I tracked this to 1994. 1994 is when the Budapest Memorandum was signed, and that was the agreement between Bill Clinton, between the Ukrainian government, the Russian government, and a multitude of other, including the British government, which basically said, look, Ukraine will give up its nuclear weapons in exchange for Russia accepting that Ukraine will be an independent country. Russia countered and said, we'll accept that as long as Ukraine promises to never join NATO.
yeah,
There was a secret agreement, or relatively secret at the time, between it was informal, between Clinton and the Ukrainian government, which said also, in exchange for giving up your nukes, if the Russians ever come knocking again, the U.S. and NATO will defend you as if you're one of us.
yeah,
And that is where we're at now. And part of the corruption, you notice it's almost exclusively the Republicans follow suit as well on, in DC. But the real driver of corruption with Ukraine is the Democratic Party. It goes back to Strobe Talbot. It goes back to the Democrats negotiating with the Ukrainian government in the 90s. It goes back to that era. It all goes back to then. And the Biden syndicate, and that's what they are, they're a criminal syndicate. The Biden syndicate came in and they basically attached themselves like a remora to that particular shark. You see, in the book, I talk about how I mentioned to you earlier, Putin humiliated Obama in their first meeting, and it was at Putin's dacha, and he made Obama sit in this small chair. It was a chair that was smaller than Putin's chair.
yeah.
They sat side by side.
Biden,
yes. So, not Biden. Yeah. Obama's legs were crossed in a very feminine manner. Putin is sitting with his legs wide open. The implication was Obama is my pet poodle. And the entire time, and Obama knew he was humiliated, so he flies back to D.C. and hands the portfolio over to his vice president, Joe Biden, who, of course, is licking his chops because he knows the money machine is in Ukraine. So that's when Hunter joins the board of Burisma, along with who? The former CIA counterterrorism center director, J. Kofor Black, as well as the former president of Poland, who is a staunch NATO supporter. This was a CIA operation, and they wanted the first son there to basically have a direct line to the vice president's office, who was running all things for Obama in Ukraine. But also, it was a check. The CIA was going to keep an eye on Obama and Biden when it came to anything with Ukraine, so that they didn't interfere with their little greasy grift machine that they had going. And that is the story of Ukraine it's not some glorious fight for democracy. No. Ukraine is the most corrupt country in Europe. Ukraine, the president Zelensky has overstayed his term in office by like 8 months, and he has no sign that he's going to be leaving anytime soon. This is not a fight for democracy. This is to defend U.S. intelligence and their allies' grift that's been going on for decades in Ukraine.
And it's interesting because, I mean, do you think that given how Putin treated Obama, we've just been chatting about, do you think Donald Trump will be able to, and Trump and Putin will be able to have a functional, effective relationship?
It's very funny. Russian media, at the direction of Putin, is trying to make it sound like, oh no, it's not going to happen. He's too strong. Putin's a tough guy. And then
Yeah.
I'm seeing, the Washington Post is making fun of Trump, and the MSNBC types are saying he's going to be Putin's poodle. Let me tell you something. The reason that Putin is now denying that he had contact with Trump, the Washington Post in the last week said there was a phone call between Trump and Putin. Well, now the Kremlin is denying that through Russian media, saying, oh, no, never happened. That's lies. And then they aired this really bizarre segment on Russian TV showing salacious photos of Melania Trump for when she was a model, saying that, basically trying to send the signal that Putin is the one controlling this. That actually was a sign of weakness on the part of Putin. He has to get a deal. He knows that, but he can't be seen as wanting a deal. So everything that we're seeing coming out of Russian media today, in my opinion, confirms we're getting a deal, but Putin has to shape the media environment at home. He can't be seen as being the guy who needs a deal. He has to be seen. So this is all. Khrushchev did the same thing, by the way, when he got the deal from Kennedy during the Cuban Missile Crisis. Khrushchev tried to spin it as, oh, I'm the tough guy. I exacted a price. Everybody knew JFK got the better of Khrushchev, but JFK played along to some degree. Same thing's happening here. Trump's getting a deal. There's a deal coming. Do not doubt me. In the first 100 days, there's going to be a deal, and it's going to be beautiful. It's going to be a big, beautiful peace deal.
And what do you think the consequences of that deal will be for NATO?
Well, Mark Rutte, who I used to know, back in the day, I used to know some of these guys. I was part of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs when I lived in Chicago. Hard to believe. Over a decade ago, I was actually in, part of these groups to some degree. Mark Rutte just came out and tried to say that if America does a deal with Ukraine, then NATO will kick America out. To which I say, don't threaten me with a good time, Mark. I welcome that. This has been the dream for 30 years on some parts of the right here in America, the part that's now dominating things. Go ahead, Mark. I'll call your bluff. You do what you got to do. We'll see how fun it is without all that fancy American money and equipment coming in your way.
Well, absolutely.
I suspect NATO, if they overreact, and they might, and I hope they do. God, I hope they overreact. If it certainly makes things easier. If NATO overreacts the way they are, then NATO is proven to be a Potemkin force. It collapses, or it exists in name only. Hopefully my friend, my colleague Sumatra Mitra over at the American Conservative, himself a British trained man, he's been talking about this for a while. I know he has ins with the transition team. I hope they bring him in for the Russia desk, because he will do wonderful things for NATO in terms of stopping them from going off the deep end the way they have for the last 30 years. In the book, I say NATO went from being an actual defensive alliance in the Cold War of equals. It has now become the villain. It's become the Warsaw Pact. It is now a woke Warsaw Pact. That's what it is. It's an ideological alliance, and it's super weak. And so if they really want to push this thing, they will expose just how weak they are. They will break apart, and then all of our problems are solved, aren't they? Because NATO expansion is what caused this war.
Well, so absolutely right. It wasn't, as the media constantly say, was it a fully fledged Russian invasion? Fully fledged, as if Russia invaded all of Ukraine. How pathetic is that? I mean, the thing, it really is pathetic. I mean, if Russia had wanted Ukraine, they could have taken all of Ukraine within 48 hours. I mean, let's be clear on that. But
they're winning. Look, they're winning. Militarily, they're winning. It may be ugly. It may be bloody. I mean, they've lost maybe 500,000 to 1 million people. I mean, it's not an easy fight, but this is a classic Russian war of attrition. This is what they do. They bleed you out. They use their mass against you, no matter how high tech. Look, ask the Germans in World War II. The Germans were technologically light years beyond the Red Army, especially when they first went in to the USSR. And guess what? Distance and time were the enemy of the Wehrmacht, much more so than the Russians themselves. It's the same thing here. distance and time, the Ukrainians are not, even with all the help from NATO, Ukrainians are barely hanging on. This is a disaster of our own making. This should not be happening still. The Russians are winning.
And yet didn't we have Zelensky coming to Biden to present his victory plan?
Actually, how's this for Huxpa? He went to Mar-a-Lago to present, or he met with Trump in the last days of the election, presenting his victory plan. And Trump looked at him like, yeah, we're not doing this. We're not doing this. This isn't the changeover from Bill Clinton to George W. Bush or George W. Bush to Barack Obama. No. This is real change. And this is going to be, we used to talk in this country during the Civil War about radical Republicans. Well, they're back, baby. And we're going to make things much better for everybody.
Yeah, exactly. Though that's the point, Brandon. It will make, for example, the European continent a safer place.
It'll stop them from being a bunch of welfare queens. I can tell you that much.
Well, you talk about, like, if you look at the American financial contribution towards NATO. I mean, if you took that away, that's why Mark Rutte he's insane. Without U.S. money, there is no NATO. That's the first.
Right.
Well, I mean, if you look at the next biggest contributor, I think is us, the UK, and then
Poland. I actually think Poland is bigger. Poland, it's the UK, and I think Germany now as well. I think there's only 4 countries that are of like 28 members. I mean, there's so many members of NATO, and almost none of them are contributing.
Yeah, Sweden, was it Finland? Oh, that's going to really scare Putin, isn't it? Oh, my God, Finland's in. That's really that's a game changer. Everything's different now. It's. I mean, I have to say, I find NATO, where it once had a purpose, I see
absolutely 100% once had a purpose. It was a great alliance. It doesn't anymore.
No.
And this is sort of the tragedy of all bureaucracies, right? It's like they don't actually want to solve the problem they're created to resolve, not really, because then that means technically they don't have a purpose anymore.
Yeah.
This was why the war on poverty in America is such a bad idea. We created all these agencies. Well, they actually don't want to solve poverty, because then that means all those jobs go away for the bureaucrats. It's the same thing. NATO is just one big multilateral bureaucracy feeding off of tax dollars of all of its members, especially the Americans. It doesn't want the Russian threat to go away. It actually wants the Russian threat to be there so that they constantly can say, hey, look, this is a threat. We have to be in existence. We have to be prepared. You have to give us money. That's what this is all about. This is, again, another grift machine.
Yeah, and the monies involved have been huge, Brandon. I mean, the transfers
certainly from us,
from you guys, but even us. I mean, I resent giving a penny to Ukraine, but there's been billions. I mean, the amount of, as you say, money that's poured into that grift machine I think it's probably unprecedented.
It is. There's a lot that they're not tracking. So, like, the numbers you hear coming out, you think, well, 6 billion here, 6 billion there. Maybe it isn't that bad. And because there's a lot of boomers I know here, and especially in Florida, a lot of retired military old guys. They're like, well, actually, that's actually not. I said, hold on, that's just the official numbers. Okay, like, first of all, that's not even, like, there's so much going there in the form of nonprofits, and there's a whole ecosystem that we've built since the 90s in Ukraine, and the Russians know that. And this is another reason why the Russians say Ukraine's a threat, because it's being used as a base to launch a regime change operation against us, and we're not going to let that fly. And so, it's way more money over the last 30 years than what is officially being reported. And by the way, the Biden administration, they've not only been lying about that, here in the States, the big scandal now is that turns out since the Biden regime took over, the FBI, they've been misreporting and underreporting crime statistics to make Biden look better. We've been lying about jobs numbers since Biden took over. So of course they're lying about this as well. You can't trust any number coming out of this regime. Not one of them is accurate.
But shit, I mean, I Brandon, I completely get that, and that's why I think the revolution that we're about to see, hopefully starting in January, when the Trump regime fully comes to power, is going to be so. It's going to be, what is it to say? Sunlight is the best disinfectant.
That's right.
And my goodness, there's going to have to be so much sunlight shone on Ukraine, on all the grifts that have been going on. But ultimately, I suppose, in the final analysis, there's the domino effect. And you mentioned this, the fact that if Ukraine can come to a peaceful resolution of some sort, then other hotspots like the Middle East, can also then be hopefully contained as well. Because what do
How
you
is this?
think?
How is this for a story? I reported this at the Washington Times, and again, nobody called. I reported this at the Washington Times about a month ago, and my other book is The Shadow War: Iran's Quest for Supremacy. I predicted what happened on October 7th. I predicted it in 2022 in the book, by the way. And I wrote in the Washington Times, the real reason the Iranians are not retaliating the way they're threatening to, part of it is I think Israel is just a superior military, technologically speaking.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
the real reason is because diplomatically behind the scenes for the last year and a half, the Russians are holding back the Iranians. The Russians are holding them back because they need Iran to keep feeding their war machine in Ukraine. And if Iran really does something crazy that provokes the Americans will come in and strike Iran, and that could end the relationship between Russia and Iran, which Russia desperately needs right now. So the Russians have been plying Iran with advanced air defense systems, advanced planes, saying, look, we'll give this to you as long as you hold back. Just hold back. And so the last 6 months, especially, the Russians are the reasons why you have not seen the breakout of a regional, probably world war in the Middle East, because they're holding their proxy back. So is the Chinese, by the way, to some degree.
Well, I mean, that's really interesting, because I think a lot of us thought that what was developing was going to end in really, as you say, potentially a global war. But Iran, actually, for all the talk, for all the hyperbole, the responses weren't that big a deal, really, when it came to Israel.
And that's largely because of the hidden hand of Putin saying, do not do this. Do not provoke a wider war. We cannot lose you right now. We need you, because Putin also needs them as a strategic lever. And so this is widely underreported. Here's another story. I can't remember the guy who wrote it. He was I can't remember. He was with an Israeli news network, but he reported this about a year ago. The Syrian Arab army was supposed to open up another front on October 7th. And at the last minute, they did not, because Putin called Assad and said, you are not doing what the Iranians want you to do, because the Americans will respond. They might even fulfill their promise to invade you. And then we're going to lose our warm water port in Tartus. We're going to lose. We've spent way too much money and time keeping you in power just for you to blow it on this ridiculous October 7th. Hold back. And the Syrians did. And at that point is when the Iranians then called up the Houthis and said, can you help us out and fill the gap the Syrians made in the attack? And that is why the Houthis opened up the other front. They were not planning to originally. It's because Putin got the Syrians to stand down to prevent a wider war. So there is a hidden hand of Russia going on in the Middle East, not because they're our friend. I mean, they're not, but it's because they are. It's because they are basically trying to prevent a breakout of hostilities everywhere that they can't contain.
Yeah, I mean, this is all the fascination of geopolitics, as you say, Brandon. It is these hidden hands. It's things aren't what they appear to be. And of course, that's doubly confounded when the mainstream media that goes out of its way to essentially provide us with fantasies and then tell us, well, this is the reality of it. But it's certainly, I mean, it is. As I said, the Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times. Right. We do live in the most interesting times, and I think we ain't seen nothing yet, because 2025 is going to be wild, as far as I can see. It's going to be without parallel, almost. I believe, in a good way.
I think in 2 years' time, the world is going to look so much different, and America is going to be so much better off. I mean, the first 6 months of the Trump administration are going to be radically different from a foreign policy perspective for the better. And then it'll have knock-on effects. We can nation build at home. We can do these deals with British, maybe. We can really change the world for the better. And it's amazing how this is all just going to change. I really think we're turning a corner if Trump can make it to Inauguration Day. So please don't travel, Trump. Stay at Mar-a-Lago until Inauguration Day. Same with JD. Stay home. We don't need you out on it. There's no more campaign. Just chill out for 69 more days and then get into DC and do the swearing in, and you've got it. Focus on building out your transition right now.
And yeah, well, exactly. I was going to say, Brandon. I mean, that seems to be what the work is now in the background. It is getting the transition teams and getting the right people in the right place, so that when it does come to inauguration day, the administration hits the ground absolutely running. Because that's the difference between Trump 2016 and Trump 2022.0.
That's right.
You know, it's
That's
like
right.
he learned. I don't even know if he thought he was going to win in 2016 or not.
He did
But
not. He did
no,
not.
no,
And he was
this is
surprised,
different.
but this is different. Well, this is also, he now knows what the stakes are. You know, my understanding, and this, I'm going to have to go in about a minute or two,
Yeah,
but
we're winding it up now. Yeah.
okay, but my understanding is he was fine. The reason he moved to Mar-a-Lago is because he was actually, after 2020, he was done with politics. He was going to just lay back and be a kingmaker, keep his head down, because he wanted those legal issues to go away. He believed that if he kept his head down, the legal issues would just go away. And of course, what convinced him and he was going to let DeSantis be the nominee. What changed his mind was two things: the Mar-a-Lago raid in August of 2023 and Alvin Bragg's indictment in New York. He knew they were coming for him no matter what. So he was going to go back and he was going to make things right, and he was going to save himself and the country. And that's what's happening now.
Let's hope it does. Brandon, you've been very generous with your time. Thank you so much for joining us. It's been a pleasure to speak with you.
We should do this more often.
I'd love to. I absolutely
I think you have my contact info, so let's keep this going.
I do. Brandon's got some really, crucial books out there with really good information. There's loads of stuff we could talk about that we didn't get into. So we'll definitely do it again, Brandon. But on behalf of my audiences, we're all over the place here. I see all the kind comments. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
And we'll catch up soon. That's us. That's it from Brandon and myself for tonight, folks. Good night.
Good night, guys.